My brother called me the family's most boring person because I always cried at his pranks. When he mashed gum into my hair, I cried. When he yanked my chair, fracturing my tailbone, I cried for 2 months flat on my stomach. Mom and Dad brushed it off. Boys will be boys, they said. Learn to take a joke. You're cold and unloving as an older sister. So I stopped crying. Even when he piled food onto my plate at dinner, I forced a grateful smile. But he mixed in a heavy spoonful of peanut butter. The second I shut my bedroom door, invisible hands crushed my throat. I couldn't breathe. Angry red hives erupted, burning like fire. I collapsed onto my bed, phone glowing in the dark. My Safari history showed one desperate search. Can a peanut allergy kill you? Consciousness faded through the wall. My brother laughed at his video game in the living room. Mom and Dad watched a sitcom. No one cared what I did behind my closed door. No one knew their daughter was dying. In my next life, I don't want to be a cruel joke's punchline. I want to be treated like a human being. Even once Ivy, come out and eat right now. My mother's voice pierced through the wooden door, dripping with irritation. I did not move. Was not because I was giving her the silent treatment. I physically could not move. My body felt like it was filled with wet cement. Every single muscle burned with a terrifying heat. I could feel the skin on my face stretching. My eyes were swollen shut into tiny, useless slits. My lips were completely engorged, so thick I could neither open nor close my mouth. My throat felt like someone had shoved burning coals down it. Every attempt to pull in oxygen felt like swallowing razor blades. Ivy, are you deaf? I said. Dinner is ready. She yelled again, louder. This time I could hear the sharp edge of anger in her tone. Her patience was already gone. Mom, she is just throwing a fit again. My brother Cole's voice drifted over from the dining table. He sounded entirely relaxed, like he was talking about the weather. I just mixed a little peanut butter into her food. I just wanted to play a prank on her. A prank? He said it so casually, as if sneaking peanut butter into the meal of someone with a deadly allergy was exactly the same as putting salt in a sugar bowl. Just a fun little science experiment. Cole, you know your sister is allergic. Why would you do that? My mother's voice carried zero actual blame. It was just a mild, helpless complaint. I just wanted to see what happened. Cole sounded completely justified. The books make it sound so scary. I bet they were just exaggerating. All right, enough. My mother cut him off. Ivy, come out and eat your dinner. Stop being so petty. With your brother? I gave no response. I was not being stubborn. My tongue had swollen to twice its size. The entire inside of my mouth was inflamed. I tried to force my jaw open, but all that came out was a pathetic, muffled whimper, like a stray cat that had just been hit by a car. Ivy, I am warning you, do not test my temper today. My mother's voice turned harsh. If you refuse to eat, you are going to starve. Do not expect us to bring you a plate. Her footsteps retreated from my door. The clinking of silverware against porcelain echoed from the living room. I had started eating the perfect family of 3 without me. I lay paralyzed on my bed, staring up at the ceiling. There was a faint water stain right above me, shaped vaguely like a butterfly. I had stared at that stain countless times growing up. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I would look at it until the tears stopped. But this time, the tears leaked out of my swollen eyes and rolled down my burning cheeks. Breathing was becoming impossible. I could hear the frantic pounding of my own heart. Thump, 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 like someone desperately banging on a door that would never open. My phone slipped from my numb fingers and hit the carpet. I let my eyes fall shut. Whatever. Let it end. Nobody cared anyway. When my soul finally drifted out of my body, my very first thought was strangely calm. So this is what dying feels like. Every ounce of pain and suffocation vanished in a split second. I floated up near the ceiling, looking down at my own body on the bed. The girl lying there had her head twisted at an unnatural angle. Her face was swollen beyond recognition. Her lips had turned a sickening shade of dark purple. Her arms were covered in a horrific rash. The phone lay discarded on the floor, the screen still brightly lit. The search engine was stuck on. The very last thing I tried to read before I died. Emergency first aid for anaphylactic shock. I floated right through my bedroom door. I drifted through the solid wood that nobody had bothered to knock on. In the living room, my mother was sitting on the sofa scrolling through her phone. The coffee table was covered in half-eaten dishes, roast chicken, a green bean casserole, and a bowl of mashed potatoes. There was a full plate sitting at my usual spot. My mother had not cleared it away. A fork was still resting on the edge of the plate. She had no idea I would never take another bite of food in my life. My father, David, sat beside her watching the evening news. The meteorologist on the screen was predicting heavy rain for tomorrow. Ivy is still not coming out. He asked casually, not even taking his eyes off the television. Ignore her. You spoil her, too
Much.
My mother kept her eyes glued to her screen, her thumbs swiping mindlessly. Cole just played a harmless joke on her. Is she really going to drag this out? Whether she is dragging it out or not. The kid is allergic. You know that. My father's tone was completely flat. No panic, no concern. He might as well have been saying the milk was expired. How bad could an allergy really be? It is not like she drank rat poison. My mother frowned in annoyance. She is just dramatic. She has been like this since she was little. The second she does not get her way, she locks herself in her room. Look at Cole. He is such a bright, happy kid. But having her around forces him to walk on eggshells floating nearby. I actually wanted to laugh. Ole walked on eggshells. He certainly did not look nervous. When he used my toothbrush to scrub the toilet bowl, he laughed louder than anyone. When he snuck to the breaker box and cut the hot water, while I was showering in the dead of winter, I was the one living in that house like I was navigating a minefield. He lived like a king who could do whatever he pleased. The only difference was who our parents chose to believe. Fine, I will go check on her. My mother finally put her phone down and stood up from the couch. I drifted behind her as she walked to my bedroom door. She pushed it open just a crack. The room was pitch black. The curtains were drawn tight. She could barely make out a curled-up silhouette on the mattress. Ivy, are you coming out to eat or not? I did not move. I was already dead. All right, stop faking it. Her voice grew even more exasperated. If you are not eating, I am throwing it away. Do not come crying to me that you are hungry at midnight. She waited for 3 seconds. The figure on the bed gave no response. You are absolutely infuriating. She slammed the door shut. Her footsteps marched back down the hall. She left. She did not take 2 steps inside. She did not flip the light switch to look at my face. If she had, she would have seen my deep purple lips. She would have touched my hand and realized it was already turning cold. But she just stood at the threshold 10 feet away, tossed out a few annoyed words, and walked away. I hovered in the hallway staring at the closed door. Mom, is she still not coming out? Cole chewed on a chicken wing, his mouth shining with grease. He glanced down the hall toward my room. Who knows with her? She is just throwing a pity party. My mother started clearing the table. She scraped the leftover chicken into the trash. She picked up my untouched plate, stared at it for a second. She hesitated briefly, then scraped it right into the garbage. 2. Is she seriously mad? Cole's voice held a tiny fraction of guilt, but it vanished instantly. I literally just put a drop of peanut butter in her food. Is she really going to overreact this much? Overreact or not? You know, she has that allergy. My mother stacked the dirty plates and carried them to the sink.
Just do not do stuff like that again.
That was it. No punishment, no lecture, no screaming that he could have killed his sister. Just a casual, do not do that again. Spoken with the exact same weight as telling him not to leave his dirty socks. On the floor, I watched the whole exchange. My chest felt strange, a deep,
hollow ache.
I was already dead. I had no heartbeat. So, why did it still hurt? Mom, do you think she's actually sick or something? Cole's voice dropped lower. What could possibly be wrong with her? My mother turned on the faucet. The loud rush of water drowned out her words. Your sister has done this her whole life. The slightest inconvenience, and she plays dead. She paused to scrub a plate. Remember when you pulled her chair out? She laid in bed for 2 months claiming she was hurt. And she was perfectly fine in the end.
Was she not?
My soul drifted into Cole's bedroom. His dual monitors were glowing brightly. A multiplayer shooter game was paused on the screen. He was leaning back in his expensive gaming chair. A lollipop in his mouth, his phone buzzed. A text from his friend. Yo, how is your sister? Cole typed back quickly. She is fine, just playing dead for attention like always. Your mom didn't chew you out?
Nah.
My mom knows. She is just a drama queen.
Nice.
We will have to think of a better prank next time.
Haha.
Yeah, next time I am going to steal her final project, so she fails her class.
Haha.
You are a menace. I stared at the glowing chat bubbles. Something shattered deep inside my chest. It was not anger. It was something much colder than anger. It was absolute suffocating despair. The realization that in their eyes, I was not even a human being. I was just a toy, a prop for their amusement, something they could break, without ever worrying about the consequences. Because my parents would never punish him. They would always take his side. I turned around and floated out of his room. I did not want to hear his laughter anymore. I did not want to know how else they planned to humiliate me. I was dead. None of this should matter to me anymore. But why did it still sting? Later that night, my mother came back to my door. This time she knocked. Ivy, come out and take your shower. No response. If you do not answer me, I am coming in. Still no response. She pushed the door open. The room was pitch black. She reached her hand in and flicked the light switch. The bright overhead bulb flooded the room. My corpse was still lying exactly where I collapsed. My posture had not shifted an inch since the afternoon. My face was even more grotesquely swollen now. My lips were a horrifying bruised plum color. My fingers were curled inward, stiff and rigid like claws. My mother stood in the doorway. She took one look at me and frowned deeply. Are you seriously still putting on this act? She did not step closer. She stood at the doorway, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. Less than 10 feet away. 10 feet.
Her daughter was dead.
Her dead child was lying 10 feet away from her. She stared at me for 3 agonizing seconds. Then she turned around and walked away. Ivy, I am telling you right now, if you do not get up, I am taking your phone tomorrow. Her voice echoed down the hall. She never looked back. She never hesitated. She just walked away. I hovered right above my own bed, looking down at my ruined body. I looked so disfigured, I barely recognized myself. Mom, you did not recognize me either. But that is because you never really looked at me to begin with. Whenever you looked at me, your eyes were always filled with impatience. You always thought I was complaining, whining, faking it. You never once considered the possibility that one day I might actually die. Even when I was lying dead right in front of you. You refused to believe it. By 10 o'clock, my father went to take his shower. My mother was back on the couch watching a reality TV show. The television blared with canned laugh tracks.
Haha.
It echoed loudly through the house. Cole was back in his room violently mashing his keyboard. He was in a voice call with his buddies. Dude, that sniper is camping in the back. Revive me. Revive me. I am down. The rain began at 3 in the morning, just as the television meteorologist had predicted. It didn't fall in a sudden, dramatic downpour, but in a steady, rhythmic tap-tap-tap against the glass of my bedroom window. I sat on the edge of my desk, my translucent legs dangling over the floor.
From
here, I could see my own face clearly. The swelling had peaked.
the skin of my
Cheeks was so tightly stretched it looked like shiny plastic, patterned with the angry, mottled violet of pooled blood. My hands, once capable of holding a warm cup of tea, were frozen in stiff, defensive curves. They looked like dry autumn leaves left to curl on the pavement. Down the hall, the house was settling into the deep, heavy silence of the middle of the night. In the master bedroom, my mother's breathing was shallow and light. She slept, with a silk-eye mask over her face, blockading the world. Beside her, my father snored, a low, wet rumble that had irritated my mother for 25 years. They slept under a heavy down comforter, their backs turned to each other, comfortable in the spaciousness of their shared life. Across the hall, Cole's room was still warm with the heat of his electronics. The fans of his dual-monitor setup whined softly, cooling down the graphics. Cards that had worked so hard to keep him entertained while his sister suffocated 10 yards away. Cole was sprawled across his mattress, one arm hanging off the side, his mouth half open. On his nightstand, his phone occasionally blinked with a notification from his Discord group. Dude, is your sister still mad? Yeah, she's locking herself in. Classic Ivy. LOL, she's so sensitive. I floated through the wall of his room. The air here smelled of stale corn chips and the cheap body spray my mother bought him in bulk. I looked down at his
face.
He looked so young when he was asleep, almost innocent, the way he did when we were toddlers, and he hadn't yet learned that hurting me was the easiest way to make our parents laugh. I reached out my hand and tried to touch his forehead. I wanted to see if I could leave a draft, a shiver, some small seed of the cold that had settled into my own bones. But my fingers passed through his skin like smoke through dry
Leaves.
He didn't even stir. He just adjusted his pillow, muttered something about a weapon upgrade in his game, and turned over. I returned to my room. There was nothing else to do. I couldn't leave the house. When I tried to drift past the front porch, a strange, heavy resistance like walking into a wall of thick syrup pulled me back. I was tethered to the place where my body lay. So, I sat on the floor beside my bed, looking at the glowing screen of my phone. The screen stayed lit for a long time before finally timing out and going black. In the reflection of the dark glass, I couldn't see myself. I could only see the outline of my bed, the shape of the closet door, and the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a butterfly with a broken wing. I remembered the day that stain appeared. It was 3 years ago during a summer storm. The roof had leaked. I had told my father about it, but he had been in the middle of teaching Cole how to grill a steak. "I'll get to it, Ivy," he had said, not looking up from the charcoal. "Stop nagging. It's just a drop of water. You're always making a big deal out of nothing." By the time the storm ended, the plaster had softened and stained. They never
Fixed it.
They just told me to move my desk so my schoolbooks wouldn't get wet. Now, the rain outside was getting heavier. The water tapped against my window, over and over, like a finger-demanding entry. At 6:30 a.m., my mother's alarm went off. I heard her slippers drag across the hardwood floor of the hallway. She went to the bathroom first. The pipes groaned as she turned on the faucet, washing her face, applying the expensive creams she claimed were the only things keeping her
Young.
then, she walked to the kitchen. I followed her, drifting through the floorboards to watch. She filled the coffee maker. The smell of hazelnut roast filled the kitchen, a rich, warm scent that used to make me feel safe on school mornings.
Now it
Smelled of nothing. I could see the steam rising from the pot, but I couldn't feel its warmth. My father came down next, dressed in his work slacks and a white undershirt.
He
Was a tall man, his hair thinning at the crown, his face set in a permanent expression of mild exhaustion. "Is she still in there?" he asked, taking a mug from the cabinet. My mother didn't need to ask who she was.
Yes.
"I checked her door 10 minutes ago. It's locked from the inside." "She's going to be late for her lecture," my father said, checking his watch. "She has that chemistry lab at 8, doesn't she?" "Let her be late," my mother snapped, pouring herself a cup. "I'm not going to beg her to come out. If she wants to ruin her GPA over a little joke, that's her
Choice.
She's 18 years old. It's time she grew up." "Cole went a bit far with the peanut butter, Helen," my father muttered, though. His tone was conversational, devoid of any real weight. Her throat could have
Gotten itchy.
"Oh, please," Helen said, waving her hand. "You know how she is. She exaggerates everything. When she was 10, she swore she couldn't breathe because Cole put a dog treat in her cereal. She's just like my sister. Everything is a tragedy. Everything is a crisis." Cole stumbled into the kitchen then, his hair messy, his eyes bleary.
He was
Wearing his school hoodie. "What's for breakfast?" "Toaster pastries are in the pantry, sweetie," my mother said, her voice instantly softening. The irritation that had sharp-edged her words when speaking of me vanished, replaced by a warm, maternal hum. "Did you sleep well?"
Yeah.
"Some guy kept sniping me in the lobby, but I got him in the end," Cole mumbled, grabbing a strawberry Pop-Tart and eating it cold. He glanced toward the hallway leading to my room. "Is Ivy still throwing a fit?" "She's still in her room," my father said. "Go knock on her door, Cole. Tell her she needs to get ready for school. If she misses her ride, I'm not driving her." "Why do I have to do it?"
Cole groaned.
"She's going to scream at me." "She's not going to scream at you," my mother said, patting his shoulder. "Just tell her to stop being childish."
Go on.
Cole sighed heavily, dragging his feet as he walked down the hall. I floated right beside him. He stopped in front of my door and knocked twice hard. "Hey, Ivy, get up. Dad says he's not driving you if you miss the bus." No answer. "Ivy, come on. I'm sorry about the peanut butter, okay? It was just a joke. You don't have to be a bitch about it." Still silence. Cole turned back toward the kitchen. "She's ignoring me." My mother's footsteps sounded in the hall. She walked up behind Cole, her face tightening with anger. "That is it. I am not doing this today. I have a meeting with the zoning board at 9, and I am not leaving this house with her acting like a toddler." She grabbed the door handle and rattled it. It was locked. "Ivy," she yelled, her palms slamming against the wood. "Open this door right
Now.
I mean it. If I have to get the spare key from the kitchen, you are grounded for a month. Do you hear me?" The silence that returned from the other side of the door was heavy. It was the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that presses against your eardrums. My father came down the hall now, his interest finally piqued by the noise. "Helen, just get the key. We don't have time for this." My mother let out a sharp, frustrated breath and marched back to the kitchen. She returned a moment later with a small brass pin, the emergency key we kept on top of the refrigerator for when Cole or I accidentally locked ourselves in as
Kids.
She inserted the pin into the small hole in the center of the doorknob. There was a soft click. If you are lying in bed staring at your phone, Ivy, so help me. My mother pushed the door open. The room was cold. Because I had suffocated, I hadn't turned on the heater and the window was slightly cracked from the day before. The smell hit them first. It wasn't the smell of rot yet. It had only been 12 hours, but it was the smells of a body that had stopped working. It was a heavy, sweetish, metallic scent like old copper coins and cold skin. My mother stopped on the threshold. Ivy, she said. Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was suddenly very small. The overhead light was still off, but the gray morning light filtering through. The window showed the shape on the bed. Ivy, get up, my father said, stepping up behind my mother. He reached past her and flipped the light switch. The bright bulb flickered once, then flooded the room with sterile, yellow
light.
My mother's hand went to her mouth. There I lay. My head was still turned at that strange, stiff angle. My tongue, swollen and dark, was protruding slightly between my blue-purple lips. The red hives on my neck and arms had turned a bruised, yellowish gray.
My eyes, swollen.
Shut, looked like twin stones set into a face that didn't look like mine
Anymore.
Oh my God, Cole whispered. He took a step back, his back hitting the opposite wall of the hallway. The strawberry Pop-Tart slipped from his fingers, landing face down on the carpet. My father didn't speak. He walked past my mother, his heavy work shoes clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. He reached out a hand that was shaking so hard he could barely aim it, and touched my shoulder. Ivy, he whispered. He pulled his hand back instantly. The cold of a corpse is different from the cold of a winter day. It's a dead
cold.
It's a cold that doesn't warm up when you touch it. Instead, it sucks the heat right out of your own skin. David. My mother's voice was high, cracked, like dry paper. David, what's wrong with her? Is she holding her breath?
It was a stupid question.
A desperate, terrified, stupid question. But she had spent 18 years believing I was faking everything, and her brain simply could not find any other file to put this information into. Helen, my father said. His voice was completely hollow. He didn't look at his
wife.
He looked at my hands, curled like claws on the blanket. Call 911. Is she having a reaction? My mother cried, her voice rising into a shriek. She finally stepped into the room, reaching out to grab my foot through the blanket. Ivy, wake up. Stop it. Stop doing this. It's not funny. She shook my leg. My body didn't wiggle like a sleeping person's. It moved as one single, stiff piece, like a log of wood. Helen, call them, my father roared. It was the loudest I had ever heard him.
Speak.
He grabbed my mother by the shoulders and shoved her toward the door. Get the phone.
Now.
Within 10 minutes, the quiet suburban street was filled with the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles. I stood on the front lawn, watching. The rain was coming down harder now, cold drops passing right through my spectral shoulders. The neighbors were beginning to come out onto their porches, coffee mugs in hand, their eyes wide as they stared at our house. The paramedics didn't run when they came out of the house. That was the first clue for the neighbors. When paramedics run into a house, there is still hope. When they walk out slowly, carrying their bags, their shoulders slumped, the neighborhood knows. A female paramedic with her hair pulled back in a neat bun was talking to my mother on the porch. My mother was wrapped in a yellow blanket someone had given her, though she wasn't wet. She was shaking so violently her teeth were clicking together. We did everything we could, ma'am, the paramedic was saying in that soft, practiced tone used for people whose lives have just shattered. But she had been gone for several hours before we arrived. Anaphylaxis it's very fast when it's not treated immediately. But she was just in her room. My mother wept, her face buried in her hands. She always locks herself in her room. We thought she was angry. Did she have an EpiPen? The paramedic asked, pulling out a small notepad. My father stood behind my mother, his arm around her waist, though he looked like he was the one who needed to be held up.
No. The doctor said she had a
mild sensitivity when she was younger. We didn't think it was this bad.
We
thought she just got hives. An allergy can worsen over time, especially with repeated exposure, the paramedic said gently. Did she ingest something she shouldn't have? Behind them, inside the foyer, Cole was sitting on the bottom step of the
stairs. He was
staring at the floor, his knees pulled up to his chest. His face was entirely white, his skin looking almost as bloodless as mine. He knew exactly what she had ingested. 2 police officers walked into the house, their heavy boots dripping water onto the polished wood of the entry hall. One of them, a middle-aged officer with a kind, tired face named Officer Miller, knelt down in front of Cole. "Hey, buddy," Miller said. "You're Cole, right?" Cole didn't look up. He just nodded once. "Did your sister eat anything unusual last night? Did she have any peanut products?" Cole's shoulders began to shake. He didn't say anything. My mother, hearing the question from the porch, turned around and came back into the house, her blanket dragging behind her. "It was an accident," she sobbed, her voice high and desperate. "It was just a joke. Cole didn't know. He's just a
boy."
Officer Miller looked up at my mother, his brow furrowing. "An accident, ma'am? What happened?" "Cole. He put a little bit of peanut butter in her dinner," my mother whispered, her eyes darting around the hallway as if looking for a way to take the words back. "But he didn't mean anything by it. He just wanted to play a
prank.
He didn't think it would do this." The officer's face didn't soften. If anything, it grew still. He stood up, looking from my mother to my father, who had followed her inside. "You knew your daughter had a peanut allergy, and your son put peanut butter in her food?" "It was just a drop," Cole suddenly screamed, his voice cracking into a high, terrified whine. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't think she would die. I swear. She always complained about stuff, so I thought she was lying. I thought she was just being dramatic." "Cole, shut up," my father hissed, his face turning a dark, dangerous red.
"No, Dad."
"I didn't mean to." Cole was hysterical now, his hands clutching at his
hair.
"I just wanted to see her face. I didn't think her throat would close up. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she come out and say something?" "She did," I whispered, though none of them could hear me. I was standing right next to the coat rack, watching my brother unravel. I whimpered, "Cole." I tried to open my mouth, "But you guys told me to stop testing your temper." Officer Miller looked at the other officer, a younger woman with dark hair. "Call the detective on duty," he said quietly. "And tell the medical examiner. We're going to need a full toxicology report." "Officer, please," my father said, his voice dropping into that tone he used when he was trying to negotiate a discount on a car repair. "This is a family tragedy. Our daughter is gone. We don't need to make this any worse than it is. Cole is 15. He didn't know." "A young girl is dead, sir," Officer Miller said, his voice flat and cold.
"We
have to follow protocol." They escorted my parents and Cole into the living room. I followed them. The room was exactly as we had left it the night before, except the television was turned off. The coffee table still had the half-empty dishes on it. The bowl of mashed potatoes had a thin, yellowish skin over the top now. My mother sat on the sofa, her body curled into a tight ball. My father stood by the window, staring out at the rain. Cole sat in the armchair, his face buried in his knees, sobbing quietly. They looked like a family in mourning. But as I watched them, I realized something. They weren't mourning me. My mother was crying because her life was ruined. She was crying because the neighbors were watching, because the police were in her house, because her perfect, clean, suburban existence had been shattered. My father was silent because he was calculating the cost. The cost of a funeral, the cost of a lawyer, the cost of his own reputation at the bank where he worked. And Cole was crying because he was terrified of what was going to happen
to him.
No one was thinking about the girl who had lain in the dark, her throat closing up, staring at a water stain on the ceiling until her heart stopped beating. By noon, the house was empty. My body had been carried out in a black zippered bag. I had watched them carry me down the steps. The black bag looked so heavy, but when I was inside it, I felt like nothing at all. My parents and Cole had been taken to the police station for questioning. I stayed behind. I couldn't leave the house, so I wandered through the empty rooms. Without the sound of the television or Cole's video games, the house was incredibly loud. The refrigerator hummed. The rain beat against the roof. The pipes clicked behind the walls. I went into the kitchen. On the counter, near the sink, was the jar of peanut butter Cole had used. He hadn't even put the lid back on properly. A silver butter knife, smeared with a thick, brown paste, was resting on a paper towel. A single fly was buzzing around it. I looked at the jar. It was a cheap brand. $3.50. That was the price of my life. $3.50 and a brother who wanted to see what would happen. At 4 p.m, the front door opened. My parents walked in. They looked 10 years older. My mother's makeup was smeared across her cheeks, and her hair was wild. My father's tie was gone, his collar open and wrinkled. Cole wasn't with them. They can't keep him, my mother was saying, her voice hoarse from crying.
He's
A minor, David. He didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. They aren't keeping him forever, Helen, my father said, his voice dead.
He
Walked to the kitchen counter and poured himself a glass of water, his hands shaking so much the glass clinked against the tap. They're holding him for
questioning.
The detective said they have to review the messages on his phone. My mother froze in the middle of the living room. The messages? The texts he sent his friends, my father said, staring down at his glass.
The
Officers said they found texts from last night. Cole told some kid named Marcus that he was going to put peanut butter in Ivy's food to see what happened. My mother's face went entirely slack. Oh God. And that's not all, my father continued, his voice dropping into a whisper. He sent another message after Ivy went to her room. He said she was playing dead for attention and that he was going to steal her final project. Next so she fails her class. My mother sank onto the sofa, her hands clutching at her hair. He was just joking.
He's a boy, David.
He didn't know she was actually dying. It doesn't matter what he knew, Helen, my father finally snapped, slamming his glass down on the counter. The water splashed over the rim, wetting the wood. The police are looking at negligent homicide. Do you understand what that means? Our son could go to a juvenile detention facility. He could have a criminal record before he even graduates high school. No, my mother shrieked. No, they can't do that to him. He has a track meet next month. He's supposed to go to state. What about his college applications? I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake my mother until her teeth rattled. What about my college applications? I wanted to ask. What about my chemistry lab? What about my final project? What about my life? But my mother wasn't thinking about my life. She was thinking about Cole's track
meet.
We need a lawyer, my father said, pulling out his phone. The best one we can afford. I'll call Harrison. He did the legal work for our mortgage.
He'll know
who to hire. Call him now. My mother wept. Call him right now. Tell him they're treating our boy like a criminal. The weeks that followed were a blur of cold rain and quiet horror. Because I was dead, time felt different. It didn't flow like a river, it pooled, like water in a clogged drain. I watched my parents navigate the wreckage of their lives. They held a funeral for me. It was a small, miserable affair. Only a dozen people showed up, mostly my mother's friends from the gardening club and a few of my father's coworkers. None of my friends were there. I didn't have many friends because I was always too tired, too anxious, too busy recovering from whatever Cole had done to me to build a life outside our walls. Cole wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. The lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Adler, had advised against it. It won't look good for the press if there are any cameras, Adler had said, during a meeting in our living room. We need to keep Cole out of the public. The narrative we are building is that of a tragic family accident.
A
brother who made a foolish, childish mistake, and a family devastated by loss. During the service, my mother wept loudly into a lace handkerchief. My father stood beside her, his face a mask of solemn grief. I sat on top of my own casket, dangling my legs. I looked at the flowers. They were white lilies, the kind that smell so sweet they make your head ache. You never liked lilies, Mom, I whispered to her as she knelt by the wood. I told you once that they smelled like dust. You told me I was being difficult. After the funeral, the real trial began. Not a trial in a courtroom that was still months away, but the trial of living in a house where a ghost resided. Cole was released on bail, under the condition that he remain under house arrest until his hearing. He wore a heavy black plastic band around his ankle that blinked with a small red light. The first night he came back, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his breathing loud in the dark. I sat in the chair in the corner of his room. I didn't do anything. I didn't rattle the doors or make the lights flicker. I didn't need to. The silence of the house was doing the work for me. Every time the floorboards creaked, Cole would jump. Every time the wind blew against the glass, his eyes would dart to the window. At midnight, he got up to go to the bathroom. He had to pass my room to get there. My door was open. My parents hadn't touched anything inside. My bed was still unmade, the sheets wrinkled where my body had lain. My desk was still covered in my biology notes, and my dirty clothes were still in the hamper. Cole stopped in front of the door. The hallway was dark, but the light from the street lamp outside cast a long, pale square of light across my floor. Cole stared into the room. His hands were shaking. Ivy, he whispered. He waited. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to. Please stop. Stop what? I wondered. I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting there, a collection of memories and cold air. But to Cole, my silence was a physical weight. He had spent his whole life taking up all the space in our house, his laughter and his shouting filling every corner, while I was forced to shrink into nothing. Now my nothingness had expanded, filling the entire house until there was no room left for him to
Breathe.
He ran back to his room and slammed the door, locking it from the inside. He didn't go to the bathroom that night. By the third month, the money was running out. The lawyer was expensive. My father had to take out a second mortgage on the house to pay the retainer. The bank where he worked had placed him on administrative leave, having an employee whose son was being prosecuted for the negligent homicide of his daughter wasn't good for their public image. My mother had stopped going to her gardening club. She had stopped going to the grocery store during the day, choosing instead to go late at night when the aisles were empty, so she wouldn't have to face the whispers of the neighbors. One evening, they sat at the dining table. There were only 3 plates now. My mother had finally cleared my spot, though. She hadn't put anything else there. It was just a blank, polished space of wood. The meal was simple, store-bought rotisserie chicken and a bag of salad. Adler says the prosecutor is offering a plea deal. My father said, his voice flat. He wasn't eating. He was just moving a piece of lettuce around his plate with his fork. My mother looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. What kind of deal? 3 years in a juvenile facility, my father said, with probation after 18 months if he has good behavior. No, my mother slammed her hands on the table. Absolutely not. 3 years? He'll miss his graduation. He won't be able to go to college. David, you can't let them do this. Helen, if we go to trial, they could charge him as an adult, my father said, his voice rising, a rare flash of anger breaking through his exhaustion.
The
detective found more texts. They found messages where he talked about putting dish soap in her water last year. They have a pattern of behavior, Helen.
They
have evidence of domestic abuse. It wasn't abuse, my mother shrieked. It was sibling rivalry. Every family
does it.
My brother used to lock me in the basement. It's normal. It's not normal when one of them dies, my father yelled, standing up so fast. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. She is dead, Helen. Ivy is dead. And our son killed her. The word hung in the air, heavy and dark.
Killed.
It was the first time either of them had said it out loud. Cole, who had been sitting quietly, his head down, suddenly stood up and ran down the hall to his room. The door slammed shut, followed by the sound of the lock turning. My mother buried her face in her arms and began to weep, that same high, grating shriek she had used since the morning I died. My father stood by the table, looking at the leftover chicken. I can't do this anymore, he whispered. He walked out of the room. A moment later, I heard the front door open and
close.
He didn't take his coat, even though it was pouring rain outside. I floated over to my mother. She was sitting alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a meal she couldn't eat, in a house we couldn't afford, with a son who was a killer and a husband who had given up. I reached out and placed my hand on her shoulder. She didn't feel my hand, but she suddenly shivered, pulling her yellow blanket tighter around herself. It's cold in here, she whispered to the empty room. Why is it always so cold? The trial never happened. Cole accepted the plea deal. The threat of being tried as an adult and facing 10 years in state prison was too high a risk, even for a family that had spent 15 years pretending nothing was wrong. The day he was taken away, the rain had finally stopped. The sun was shining, bright and hot, melting the last of the winter frost from the lawn. I stood by the driveway as the police car pulled up to the house. Cole came out, dressed in a plain gray sweatshirt and sweatpants. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked small. He had lost weight, his clothes hanging loosely off his shoulders. His hair was cut short and he kept his head down, refusing to look at the neighbors who had gathered at the end of the driveway to
watch.
My mother walked beside him, clutching his arm, weeping. I'll write to you every day, sweetie, she sobbed. Every single day. We're going to get you out of there. This is just a mistake. It's all just a big misunderstanding. Cole didn't answer. He didn't look at her. As he reached the car door, he stopped. He turned his head and looked back at the house. He looked at the front porch, then up at the second floor at the window of my bedroom. I was standing there in the window, my spectral form clear against the glass. For the first time in his life, Cole really looked at me. There was no laughter in his eyes. There was no defiance. There was only a deep, terrifying recognition. He saw the purple lips, the swollen cheeks, the gray, ruined skin of the sister he had broken. He let out a small, choked gasp and hurried into the back of the police car. The officer closed the door, and the car drove away, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. My mother stood in the driveway, her hands reaching out after the car until it turned the corner and was gone. My father didn't stand with her. He had already packed his bags the night before. His car was parked in the street, filled with his clothes and his books. He had filed for divorce on Monday. He walked down the porch steps, past my mother without saying a word, got into his car, and drove in the opposite direction. My mother was left alone. She stood in the middle of the driveway, the bright spring sun shining down on her, highlighting the deep lines of age and grief on her face. She looked at her empty house, then at her empty hands. I drifted down from the window, landing softly on the grass beside her. The resistance that had kept me bound to the house was starting to fade. I could feel the edges of my spirit softening, turning into mist, ready to be carried away by the warm spring breeze. I looked at my mother one last time. She had spent her entire life refusing to see me. She had looked through me, talked over me, brushed aside my pain as if it were nothing but an inconvenience. Now, she would spend the rest of her life seeing nothing else. Every corner of the house, every empty plate, every silence would be filled with the memory of the daughter she had let die behind a closed door. "Goodbye, Mom," I whispered. I didn't wait for her to answer. I turned my back on the house with the butterfly-shaped water stain, and for the first time in 18 years I took a deep, clear breath of fresh air and floated away into the light.